There is a place in the American imagination that doesn't quite exist on any map. You can find it between the covers of 1,000 novels. You can find it on a cinema screen, in the particular quality of golden hour light over a western landscape, in the sound a harmonica makes when someone plays it slowly and alone. You can find it, if you listen carefully, in the stories this channel has spent 30 days telling you. We have told you about gunfights and sacred visions, about a lawman who arrested his own son, and a love story that lasted 47 years, about an outlaw who found God in a prison cell, and a holy man who saw the future in a sun dance, and a woman whose body the frontier swallowed whole and spat back out as something harder and stranger and more remarkable. But we have not yet answered the one question that sits underneath all of it. Why does any of this still matter? Why does a 30-year window of American history, a single generation, a handful of dusty towns, a few thousand square miles of contested territory, still capture the imagination of billions of people around the world, 150 years later? That is what today is about. The legend that started it all. Why the Wild West still captures the world's heart. The two Wests. Let's start with something the historian Richard Slotkin identified decades ago. An observation so simple and so clarifying that once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. There have always been two Wests. The historical West, the one that actually existed. Farmers, ranchers, miners, laundresses, merchants, formerly enslaved people building new lives, native peoples defending their homelands, culturally diverse, economically brutal, often unglamorous. 30 years, then over. The mythic West, the one that lives in the imagination. Cowboys at high noon, lone heroes against impossible odds, vast, open, morally clear. Built not by the people who lived it, but by the novelists, painters, showmen, and filmmakers who came after. Here is the remarkable thing. The mythic West began to be built while the historical West was still happening. The dime novels that romanticized Wild Bill Hickok were published while Hickok was still alive and still shooting people. Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, perhaps the most influential piece of American entertainment in the 19th century, opened in 1882, the same year Jesse James was shot in the back of the head in St. Joseph, Missouri. The legend and the reality ran on parallel tracks, and the legend was always faster. What strikes me about this, and I have been thinking about it across this entire month of stories, is that the people who lived in the historical West were not unaware of what was being built around them. Jesse James read his own legend in newspapers and loved it. Wyatt Earp consulted for Hollywood. Geronimo signed autographs at the World's Fair. They were not passive subjects of someone else's myth-making. They participated in it. Sometimes they drove it. The line between the two Wests was never clean. Why the myth took root? But why this particular myth? Why did a 30-year period on the American frontier become the most widely reproduced, most globally recognizable historical mythology on Earth? Other eras had gunfighters. Other civilizations had frontiers. Other periods of American history were just as violent, just as transformative, and produced figures just as remarkable. None of them captured the world's imagination the way the Wild West did. The answer, I think, has three parts. The first part is timing. The Wild West happened at the exact moment that mass communication, newspapers, photography, the telegraph, made it possible for stories to travel faster than the people living them. Buffalo Bill did not have to wait for historians to mythologize the frontier. He could take the frontier on tour to New York and London and Paris in real time, while it was still happening. The world received the Wild West legend fresh, and first impressions, in mythology as in life, tend to stick. The second part is the idea of reinvention. The frontier promised something that no other place in the world, at that exact moment in history, was offering quite so openly. A person could go west and become someone entirely different. Leave behind a failed marriage, a criminal past, a family that had broken apart, a name that meant nothing. The land itself offered a kind of second chance that felt almost miraculous in the industrializing, stratifying, increasingly rigid world of the late 19th century. That promise resonated not just with Americans but with people around the world who looked at the overcrowded cities of Europe and Asia and felt the same hunger for open space, for possibility, for the feeling that tomorrow did not have to look like yesterday. The Wild West was not just an American story. It was a universal fantasy about starting over. And the third part, the one that I think matters most, is moral clarity. The mythic West offered something increasingly rare in the modern world, a story where you could tell the heroes from the villains. The lawman wore the badge, the outlaw robbed the stage. Good and evil were not blurred, they were written in the color of a hat. In a complicated world, that kind of clarity is enormously appealing. It was in 1882. It still is now. The stories, the myth forgot. But here is where this channel has tried to do something different from the myth. Because the mythic West, for all its power and its beauty and its genuine usefulness as a story, left people out. It left out Reeves, the most effective lawman in the history of the American West, whose record makes every name in every Western movie look modest by comparison. Left out because the myth had a fixed idea of what the hero looked like. It left out Josephine Marcus, the woman who chose Wyatt Earp and followed him to goldfields in Alaska and sat beside him as Hollywood turned his past into a movie genre. Left out because the myth had a fixed idea of whose love story was worth telling. It left out the white buffalo calf woman, and Sitting Bull's vision, and Geronimo's 30-year war, and the Lakota families who watched their world close in around them from every direction while the dime novels were turning their struggle into scenery. The mythic West was built by people who were not in it. Novelists in New York, painters in New Jersey, showmen who understood what audiences wanted and gave it to them. And what was built was powerful and real, and has lasted 150 years. But it was always a selective truth. This is why I think channels like this one matter. Not because we are better storytellers than the myth makers, but because the full story is more interesting. Reeves arrested 3,000 criminals and never once took a bullet. Josephine Marcus followed a fugitive into a San Francisco backstreet because she had decided, and that was that. Sitting Bull saw the future and was right. Crazy Horse refused to let anyone capture his image. These are not footnotes to the Wild West legend. They are the Wild West legend, finally told without the selective editing. Why it still matters. So why does the Wild West still capture the world's heart? I want to give you the real answer, not the academic one, not the cultural studies one, the real one. Because the frontier was a place where ordinary people were asked to be extraordinary. Not because they wanted to be legends, not because anyone was watching most of the time, but because the circumstances demanded it, and they rose, imperfectly, contradictorily, with all the mess and complication of real human beings, to what the moment required. A woman crossed an entire continent to build a homestead on a piece of ground no one else wanted. A man rode alone through 75,000 square miles of the most dangerous territory in North America because someone had given him a warrant and the job needed doing. A holy man danced for 36 hours, bleeding, and saw the future clearly enough to change what his people believed was possible. A young woman ran away from a boarding school in San Francisco because the world outside the parlor was calling her, and she had the particular kind of courage that answers that call. None of them were trying to become legends. They were trying to survive, to protect the people they loved, to do the job in front of them, to get to tomorrow. And the legend found them, because that kind of effort, plain, daily, undramatic human effort in the face of impossible circumstances, is the only thing that ever truly becomes legendary. The frontier was never just a place. It was an idea about what a person could become when everything that was familiar had been stripped away, and only the essential things remained. That idea did not die in 1895, when the Census Bureau declared the frontier closed. It lives in every story we have told this month. And it lives in you, in the reason you clicked on this video, and stayed, and came back, and brought someone else with you. You are drawn to the frontier because some part of you still believes in what it promised. That tomorrow does not have to look like yesterday, that a person can start over, that what you do with the circumstances in front of you is the only biography that finally matters. The people we met. Over the past 30 days, we have introduced you to some extraordinary people. Wyatt Earp, who walked into the most famous gunfight in American history and came out the other side, and then spent 47 years being loved by a woman who was worth more than the legend. Sitting Bull, who danced for 36 hours and saw the soldiers falling, and then heard a meadowlark tell him his own people would end him, and kept living anyway, with everything he had, until December 15, 1890. Geronimo, who fought for 30 years and gave his final speech in Skeleton Canyon with the dignity of a man who had never once been less than exactly who he was. Reeves, who memorized 3,000 warrants because he never learned to read, and arrested his own son because the warrant bore his name and the law was the law. The white buffalo calf woman, who walked into a starving people's camp with a pipe wrapped in sage and left them with 2,000 years of prayer. Billy the Kid, who was 19 years old and already gone. Doc Holliday, who looked at his bare feet in a sanitarium bed in 1887 and said, "This is funny." John Wesley Hardin, who became the superintendent of a prison Sunday school and passed the Texas bar examination in a cell in Huntsville and was shot from behind before the story could finish. Josephine Marcus, who chose Wyatt Earp and never stopped choosing him, who died penniless in 1944 with her ashes already reserved for the place beside his. These were real people. Their names were real. Their choices were real. Their grief and their courage and their extraordinary ordinary lives were real. They did not know they were becoming the Wild West. They were just living. And now you know them a little better, and that means they are a little less forgotten. That is what this channel is for. 30 days, 22 videos, stories from every corner of the Wild West, its gunfights and its sacred ceremonies, its outlaws and its lawmen, its love stories and its tragedies, and its 8 genuinely unbelievable true stories that no reasonable person should believe but must. We are only just getting started. The frontier that we have covered in 30 days could fill 30 years of stories, told properly, with the care and the honesty they deserve. The stories of people who were left out of the original legend. The native nations, whose histories run deeper than the Wild West era by thousands of years. The women who built the frontier, without being asked and without being remembered. The men whose names history dropped because the myth had no room for them. Subscribe to Legends of Wild West. Not because we promise you easy heroes or clean villains. Not because we will tell you only the parts of history that feel comfortable, but because the real stories, all of them, the sacred and the strange, and the heartbreaking, and the genuinely unbelievable, are worth knowing. Because the people who lived them deserve to be remembered honestly. Because history, told properly, is the best story there is. The frontier is still out there. Let's keep riding.